Thank you very much. I'll get the last session and I'll try and not delay us too much for going on. I think we all had slightly different titles. I'm going to talk about a personal perspective as a member of the Baha'i Faith on stem cell research and cloning. So I'm going to cover, probably not actually, just very briefly talk about the background, which I think June very kindly went through in much more detail, the science of it. And then talk about where the source of decision-making comes from in the Baha'i Faith, similar to my colleague previously. And I'll then really focus on the quotes from my perspective on the relevant Baha'i principles that we can use to make decisions and come to a conclusion. So June's very nicely already covered this, but stem cells are really about the different types of cells, and it's really in the state of infancy, the research within this area at the moment. June talked about the fact that we've got embryonic, adult, and more recently induced stem cells, and the advantages and disadvantages of those. And human cloning, really, there's also two approaches I won't go into, but there's the identical clones that comes from splitting cells, and there's the dolly the sheep type of cloning, which is the other approach. And the reason for doing these things is for two reasons: partly for therapeutics and to improve our understanding of the genetics and to be able to provide treatments. And the second one is reproductive purposes, which can be used for all sorts of reasons as well. So how are ethical decisions made in the Baha'i Faith? Unlike a lot of other religions, the responsibility in decision-making, there's no clergy in the Baha'i Faith, so decisions are made by individuals by using sources around them to come to a decision by themselves. So we take account of the writings of the founders of our faith and authorised interpreters of the faith, and we are then responsible to make decisions based within the parameters of those teachings, and the decision is between our conscience and God. Where there is no authoritative direction within the Baha'i writings, or within all the faith writings, we can refer to any faith writings, then legislation is entrusted to the supreme body for the Baha'i Faith. It's the elected body, which is called the Universal House of Justice, which is a body of 9 members who are elected every 5 years, and they reside in this building on Mount Carmel in Haifa. So this is where we turn to for any questions where there isn't anything within the writings. So what is the Baha'i perspective? The Baha'i Faith is one of the newest of the world religions. It's about 150 years old. But nevertheless, the science of stem cell research, that, despite what our friend said about Hinduism, is relatively new. So there is nothing in the Baha'i writings about it directly, and there isn't in any of the other writings. And there is no supplementary legislation about this at the moment by the Universal House of Justice. What we have is that the House of Justice has said that at the moment it's too premature for it to give consideration to this matter and the spiritual consequences of it. And so individuals are asked to consider for themselves, from the Baha'i writings, from the knowledge of the Baha'i teachings and the nature and purpose of life, to come to conclusions from their own perspective as to what is and isn't right within STEM research. But we're also told that we should be careful that we don't make judgments, dogmatic statements, or what I will say is the Baha'i perspective. So I just wanted to emphasize that, and that's why my title was a personal perspective. So what I've done is to take the Baha'i writings and make my own interpretation. That doesn't mean it's a Baha'i perspective, and others may not necessarily agree with that. So where do we go? I thought the next bit, really, I just wanted to talk about some of the principles that we could use to try and make decisions within the parameters of the principles within the Baha'i Faith that might help us to think about what is and isn't right. And this isn't exhaustive either, but I thought so I'm going to read some quotes about the importance of science and the acquisition of knowledge. Again, in the Baha'i Faith, we're told that knowledge is a wondrous gift of God, and we should make every effort to advance knowledge, the knowledge of the day. And knowledge is seen as a wing to man's life and a ladder for his ascent. In particular, scientific knowledge is seen as the highest attainment, and science can be used for discovering realities. We're told that the man of science is perceiving and is endowed with vision, and an investigative mind is attentive and alive. So through the process of inductive reasoning and research, we're informed about what appertains to humanity, its status, conditions, and happenings. So knowledge is something that we should be striving to achieve, and scientific knowledge is something that we should be looking at. Abdu'l-Baha, who's the son of the founder of the Baha'i Faith, sorry, this doesn't work, also tells us about the importance of science and religion working hand in hand. Is there a... Sorry, I'll do it this way. I think it does. Oh, there we go. So he tells us that, we know that science is a changing state. So scientists continually disprove and reject the conclusions of the ancients. Nothing is fixed, nothing is final. Everything is continually changing because human reason is progressing. And so new roads of investigation arrive and different conclusions arrive at every day. In the future, much as what is announced and accepted as true now will be rejected, and we've seen that happen. This is how it's been. It will continue ad infinitum. So science is a progressive thing, as we know. But within the Baha'i teachings, Baha'u'llah, who's the founder of the Baha'i Faith, stresses the importance of science and religion working hand in hand. They're two different elements of looking at reality. And religion must stand the analysis of reason. It must agree with scientific fact and proof, so that science will sanction religion and religion fortify science. So they're not isolated, they work hand in hand. And similarly, we're told that religion and science are the two wings upon which our intelligence can soar and the human soul progresses. So it's not possible to fly just with one. So if we try to fly with the wing of religion on its own and not consider science, we're at risk of falling into the quagmire of superstition. On the other hand, if we try and use science without moral principles, without use of religion, we would fall into the slough of materialism. So those two wings have to be balanced, and they look at, again, different perspectives of looking at the same thing. The other principle that I think is important was emphasised in the talk by Naveed as well, about the importance of keeping healthy. So again, in the Baha'i writings, there's emphasis on the importance of not neglecting our health, but considering it as a means to enable us to serve. So we should look after our health, because to be healthy allows us to be able to do good in this world. The body should be well cared for so that it can do its work. Wish thou for health so that you can serve. So we're told it's important. And similarly to what Naveed was saying, it's incumbent upon us to seek medical treatment and to follow the doctor's instructions. So if we are ill, then we are advised to seek medical help and to seek the competent physicians. The next principle that I was just going to touch on, again, relevant to what's been talked about in a lot of the talks, is the perspective of the Baha'i perspective of the soul. Again, not dissimilar to any of the other religions. I think we have, obviously, there are similarities. The individual has its beginning when the soul associates itself with the embryo at the time of conception. But within the Baha'i writings, we're told that the moment and nature of these events in conception is a mystery. And in fact, the period that the embryo is growing in the womb of the mother, at some point in a gradual process, the soul becomes associated with that body, but we don't know when that moment necessarily is. The association of the body of the soul with the body is similar to that of a light with a mirror that reflects it. So the light which appears in the mirror is not inside it. So perhaps differently from some of the other religions, from a Baha'i perspective, we don't believe that the soul is inside us, but the relationship is like the light in the mirror. So it's from an external source. So the soul isn't inside us. It has a special relationship, and together with the body and the soul make the human being. The sanctity of human life, again, is emphasized in all the religions and any sort of moral principles. And basically, as in any other religion, the deliberate taking of human life is forbidden. But there are certain possible exceptions. And for example, in the matter of abortion, again, as in some other religions, it's clear that that women should not have an abortion just because of birth control, but there may be circumstances in which abortion might be justified. And at the present time, again, the Universal House of Justice doesn't tell us what those circumstances are necessarily, that where it's permitted or not. It's left to the conscience of the individual to take account of the principles within the Baha'i Faith about the sanctity of life and decide whether it's appropriate or not. The last principles that I just wanted to talk about is why we're here, the purpose of life, because I think, again, that has a bearing on thinking about stem cell research as well. In the Baha'i writings, we're told that the purpose of God in creating man had been and will ever be to enable him to know his creator and to attain his presence. And again, we're here for the reason, so the analogy is used within the Baha'i writings that the reason for us being here is to prepare us for the next life. So the beginning of his human life, man was embryonic in the world of the matrix. There we received capacity and endowment for the reality of human existence. The forces and powers for this world were bestowed upon him in that limited condition. So in this world, we have a need for things like hearing, the senses, touch, and those things were given to us during our growth within the womb. So in this world, we needed eyes, we received them in the world of the womb. We needed ears, and we obtained those in preparation for our new existence. And so we prepared for this world in the world of the womb. And the analogy that's used in the Baha'i writings is that this world, in a similar way, is a time when we prepare for our journey in the next life. So in this world, we should prepare ourselves for the life beyond. And the things that we need in this world to prepare us are things like justice, mercy, truthfulness, the virtues that help us to, those are the tools that we will need in the next life. So in the same way that we had preparation in the previous world, now we need to prepare ourselves in this world for the next world. And that's seen as the purpose of our life. And as a follow-on from that, religion, God's purpose in sending his prophets unto man, is first to liberate us from the darkness of ignorance and guide us to the light of true understanding, to help us to prepare for doing good, and also to bring peace and tranquility to mankind. And I like this quote, so I just thought I'd include it. So, the honour and distinction of the individual consists of this, that he among all the world's multitudes should become a source of social good. Is any larger bounty conceivable than this, that an individual, looking within himself, should find that he has become the cause of peace and well-being, of happiness and advantage to his fellow man? No, by the one true God, there is no greater bliss, no more complete delight. And I think we'd probably all agree that being able to do good is something that makes us feel good, and is something that's important. So those are just a quick run through of some of the concepts that I think help us to make decisions, and within those parameters then we can think about, well, what do we think about, what should we do about stem cell research? And I think, as everyone else has said, it's probably not very different. In terms of regenerative adult stem cell research, there's probably little controversy. So if we're using stem cells for regenerative purposes, that's probably a good thing. We're using it for cure, for treatment and medical illness, and that's something we should do. Thinking about embryonic stem cell research, I think the things that to consider are considering when is the period of conception, that period when the soul associates itself, and as we were talking about previously as well, I think we all agree that when does a clump of cells become an entity, and also thinking about the potential of benefit versus the potential of harm. In terms of reproductive cloning, my thoughts were that we need to consider what's the purpose of our life and what's the motivation behind cloning. We had some interesting thoughts about why people might consider cloning and what it might be used for, and also what are the alternatives? Is it really something we need to do? What else could we do? And just to finish off, this is from the Baha'i writings as well. So in such aspects of morality, the guidance that Baha'i institutions offer to mankind does not comprise a series of specific answers to these moral questions, but rather the illumination of an entirely new way of life through the renewal of spiritual values. The growing public disquiet about the accelerating moral breakdown throughout the world relates to the fact that such problems are symptoms of a profound malaise which can be healed only through acceptance of the divine message. So there are no clear answers. I haven't come up with this is the Baha'i perspective and this is what is and isn't right, because I don't think we have that answer. But we have a set of principles from which we can consider those as individuals, as intelligent people. And I think going beyond that, again, I think this quote that beyond all of this is thinking about, well, why are we thinking about this in the first place? What goes beyond it? What are the principles behind it? What's the purpose of doing this sort of research? And is it going to do good or not? Thank you.